It's okay. but we really did get a comprehensive idea of what students were wanting, and even now, that experience has shaped the way I view advocacy now. If you are willing to put in the time and energy and just talk to people one-on-one, they will listen and they will adapt their behavior, they will want to get engaged with you. And that's exactly what we saw. We saw hundreds upon hundreds of people who have been misrepresented in the past by their student governments and by really any governing body that they've ever looked up to. We were talking to a lot of marginalized groups who were never campaigned to because obviously they're a minority on campus, and so appealing to them alone is not going to win you the election. But we found we could do both. We can advocate for things that benefit everybody and bring everybody into the conversation. So Carlos and I obviously had an agenda going into the year. As you could tell, I care a little bit about civic engagement, and that was one of our 3 pillars for our campaign platform. We saw essentially no efforts from the Department of Student Involvement, very minor efforts in the past, to make it accessible for people to vote. And we saw a lot of additional barriers too that weren't anybody's fault, but things of on-campus students don't get door knocked by candidates, and that's something a lot of people don't think about, but that is what sparks a lot of people's interest, is by that person ringing your door, that person leaving literature, getting that email. Fortunately, social media engagement really vamped up this year in terms of getting out the vote. But we saw a lot of potential there, and a lot of low-hanging fruit, quite honestly. A lot of things that we didn't understand why they weren't being done before. So we went into this year, and one of our one of our main priorities was creating a higher education legislative report card. We felt like higher education is consistently an issue that is neglected in the state of Idaho, and we felt that there are many reasons for that, obviously, but we felt like one of the reasons is that we don't have a centralized message. We aren't communicating with the same voice. We have different higher education institutions across the state with their own separate lobbyists, with their own interests. And what we found by talking to student body presidents at the other public colleges and universities in the state is that they felt exactly the same way. Our universities may have their own individual interests, and of course we want to advocate for our individual institutions to an extent. But for the most part, a lot of the things we can advocate for with higher education would benefit all students in the state of Idaho. So we wanted to create an accessible way for students to receive this information. I did have a slide with some of the screenshots, but that's the slide I couldn't get pulled up, so I will just explain it to you. But essentially what we did is we pulled out around 21 bills from the last legislative session in 2018, and we rated them on a scale of 1 to 5 in terms of impact they should have on the report card. Then we went through one by one with all of the representatives and all of the senators, and we determined who voted for what. And we created this report card that was very easy to digest. It was easy to understand. It provided simple information, obviously, in terms of a letter grade or a percentage grade, but it had supplemental information as well. So what we did is we fulfilled a need. We heard time and time again, of course, for a lot of students, actually accessing the voting process can be difficult. Fortunately, we have really great voting laws in Idaho for the most part. But a lot of it is a lack of voter education, and we hear that time and time again. Of course, we don't want people voting if they have no idea what they're voting for. And so if our sole push is last minute to get out the vote, what kind of vote are we getting out if it's not an informed one? And so we wanted this to be a multifaceted effort. Of course, we want to get people to the polls, but we also want young people voting down ballot and voting on propositions and for more local candidates, because that's where their vote is most impactful, as I'm sure we're all on the same page about. And so we created this legislative report card. We created a series of social media graphics that made it very easy to share, very easy to digest if you only do have a minute in the day. And then we created a more comprehensive report with a summary about our project, our specific initiatives and purpose, legislation summaries, and some additional information like that. We created an honor roll for both representatives and senators because we didn't want this to be a project that punished everybody. We wanted to be calling people into the conversation. We didn't want to isolate ourselves from advocacy at the state level. And so by unifying with these leaders at public colleges and universities throughout the state, we created a very strong message that we're planning to recreate year to year after each legislative session. So I know, I'm not sure where this originates. I know the League of Women Voters does create a voting guide, right? I'm not sure, is it you all directly? Okay, okay. Sorry, I wasn't sure if it was like Idaho, like higher up. So that's amazing, and that is the exact kind of thing we need to keep on doing. We were sharing your voting guide as well. I was sending out emails to the entire student body, including your information, including our voting guide, and I think those are the exact kind of things we need to keep on doing. So first of all, just side note, thank you for investing in that. It does make a difference, and it makes voting a lot more accessible to people who don't know where to go and are trying to enter the process, which obviously no, or you wouldn't be doing the project, but I just want you to know that it is seen and very much appreciated. And we echoed the same thing. And then, so we got this voter education piece down, right? We thought we had made it more accessible, and then it got to actually getting students to the polls. And we started hearing that there was not going to be a campus polling location held at the KB Dome for this midterms election. And I think that is a completely reasonable choice in many ways. I think, like I mentioned earlier, students usually don't turn out to vote. There's a reason why people usually don't try to appeal to them or include them in their strategy, and it's because everyone assumes they aren't going to engage. In the past, that has been the case a lot of the time. And so there were a lot of headlines coming out like this. Fun stuff. Let me go back. And so this was a concern to us because we did not think there was any malicious intent behind this decision. We completely understood why, right? It's like nobody in the county is rolling in dough necessarily, right? Like we have to make cuts, we have to prioritize our funding and our efforts at the end of the day. But us as a student government and as a Department of Student Involvement felt like this should be a priority, and that this was like pretty low-hanging fruit in terms of engaging students. So we sparked kind of a conversation in the community. I'm sure all of you have probably heard about this, I'm assuming, about everything that happened, and it sparked a good conversation moving forward. And so what we did in response was, obviously this has happened. There isn't going to be a polling location on campus this year. Okay, what can we do to make the most of it? So we thought we would reinvent the way that we look at voting and engaging people. And so we created an event called Party to the Polls, in which people could come together for a community party with free food and live music and games, video games, other types of entertainment. We had cornhole. All while making actual voting more accessible to them as well. So while we were having this event for 6 hours on election day, we were continuously shuttling students to and from the polls, or really anybody. It was open to anyone, but obviously students were the main ones that came because they don't have cars. And we shuttled around 400 people to the polls that day, which was very exciting. It was more than double what we thought it would be, actually. So we did not have enough food. But we really did not. We had a lot of grumpy people about wanting nachos. But this was really like one of the best events I think has ever been put on at the university, and I can say that very confidently. I think a lot of people have realized now that students will turn out the vote if you just make it accessible to them. Even within the lounge, we printed out the League of Women Voters voting guide, we printed out the legislative report card, and like our student newspaper voting guide that they produced. We were putting them on tables everywhere, and it was just a really great experience. It made it less of a process and more of an experience. And I think that's what we need to look at. These things don't necessarily have to be high cost. Like, we provided nachos and paid cheap bands to play, and got like some games donated, and it really showed like if we were willing to go out and talk to people about this event, this idea we had, people are willing to engage and help. And so although this is my last year here, unfortunately, this event should be continuing before every election is what we're planning on doing. And I think we've really shifted the conversation. This was the first time we've had students even stay in the lounge past like 5 p.m. Usually they just go home after their classes. And I think a lot of that is the universities, that falls on the university. But so we created this event that was really exciting. Like I said, 400 people we shuttled, and we estimated another more than 100 or so, like maybe 150 additional people came to the event but had already voted on their own time. They were driving themselves or had absentee voted, something like that. And we don't even have a complete gauge on like what our efforts were actually able to accomplish, because obviously we were emailing students out, we were posting on social media. So I think we accomplished something really special here, and I don't think it's because we're like the best event organizers in the world and we've done this like a million times. Like, we've never done an event like this. We've never seen an event like this, and it was nothing special about us. What was special was that these young people are so willing to engage that if you just crack the door open a little bit more, they really show up. And that's what it taught us. So the headlines started to look a little bit different. Instead, they were talking about how this was the highest midterms voter turnout in Leetah County since 1994, on par with presidential elections. Now additional polling locations are being considered, which is really exciting. So it seems that this has shifted the conversation around engaging young people in the political process, which is why I'm really excited to be here with you today. Although this year was amazing and what was accomplished was amazing, and we have great people dedicated to making even more improvements in the future, I think it's really important that we don't forget this, right? Like, this is a great example of making things more accessible, because students do have a lot of barriers that other people may not. Of course, everybody has their own barriers, you know, like a lot of people have mobility barriers in terms of getting to the polls, and that's so important. We should focus on that. We should focus on going to, like all different types of communities and engaging them. But most students don't have cars on campus. I have never had a car since I've been here, and we're discouraged actually from bringing our cars to campus. The walk to the fairgrounds is pretty far, you know, with only one polling location accessible to us. That is a very long walk in the cold, and while I'm crazy and I would walk like 10 hours to go vote, most people would not, and most people should not be expected to, right? Like, we're all working jobs, we're in classes, and our lives are crazy, and it shouldn't be a burden to engage in the political process. So I think there's a lot we can do.